I never thought Ethan would be the one to shatter my trust. He was more than just my nephew. He was like a best friend, always there through my darkest days. After my painful breakup, he became my rock, offering comfort in a way no one else could. We'd sit for hours, talking about life, love, and the pain of losing people we thought would stay forever. His presence felt safe, like family should. Ethan had always been a kind soul. Even as a child, he had this way of making people feel understood. As he grew into a man, that kindness never wavered. He was protective, always looking out for me, making sure I was okay. At first, I thought nothing of it. Family is supposed to care, right? But in hindsight, there were moments that should have made me question everything. It started with the way he looked at me, longer than necessary, as if he were studying my face, searching for something unspoken. Sometimes, he'd say things that felt oddly personal, like how I deserved someone who truly appreciated me, or how any man who let me go was a fool. I'd laugh it off, thinking he was just being supportive. I had no reason to doubt him. One evening, we sat together, sipping tea as the sun set. The conversation drifted to relationships, and Ethan grew unusually serious. He asked if I ever regretted my past love, if I ever wished I could turn back time and make different choices. I told him I had no regrets, only lessons. He nodded, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. "You know," he said quietly, "not every man would be stupid enough to let you go." I smiled, assuming he meant it as encouragement, but something about the way he said it left a strange feeling in my chest. He reached out then, his fingers barely brushing against mine before he pulled back, almost hesitantly. I shook it off, telling myself I was overthinking. Ethan was family, my nephew. There was no way he meant anything more than support. But as the days passed, I couldn't ignore the shift in his behavior. He lingered when we spoke, stood too close when we talked. His words became softer, more deliberate, laced with something I refused to acknowledge. The night before everything changed, I thanked him for always being there for me. His response was immediate, almost too eager. "Of course. You're the most amazing woman I know." Something in his voice made me pause. But before I could question it, he smiled, standing up to leave. As I watched him walk away, I told myself it was nothing. Just a nephew who cared deeply for his aunt. I should have listened to that sinking feeling in my gut. I should have seen what was coming. But sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones who hurt us in ways we never see coming. Lately, Ethan had been different. The way he looked at me no longer felt like admiration. It felt like something else, something I didn't want to name. He found reasons to be near me, to brush against me, to hold my gaze just a little too long. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but his actions became harder to ignore. One evening, we sat outside under the stars. The air was crisp, and the conversation started light. Memories of childhood, funny family moments. But then Ethan shifted the topic. He asked if I believed in soulmates, if I thought love could exist where it wasn't supposed to. His voice was careful, as if he was testing my reaction. "Sometimes," he said, "we meet the right person at the wrong time, or in the wrong circumstances." I nodded, thinking he was talking about his past relationships. He had struggled with love, always searching for someone who truly understood him. But then he added, "What if the right person was always there, just unreachable?" A cold unease crept over me. I gave a cautious smile, trying to steer the conversation away, but he wasn't done. He started talking about the kind of woman he admired, strong, kind, someone who had been through pain but still carried herself with grace. He described me. I laughed nervously. "Ethan, you'll find someone who's right for you. You're young. You have time." His eyes didn't waver. But what if I already have? My heart pounded. I told myself he was just being dramatic, lost in a moment of vulnerability. Maybe he was confusing gratitude with something deeper. I decided not to address it directly, but the air between us had shifted. Over the next few days, his behavior became more deliberate. He'd find reasons to touch my hand, to brush my hair from my face. He complimented me constantly, not in the way family does, but in a way that made my stomach tighten with discomfort. Then came the late-night message. You're the most amazing woman I know. I don't think anyone could ever replace you. I stared at the screen, my chest tight. This wasn't normal. This wasn't something a nephew said to his aunt. But I didn't respond. I told myself I was overthinking, that he was just being sweet, that I was reading too much into things. Deep down, I knew I wasn't. A line was being drawn, and I wasn't sure he saw it. Or worse, maybe he did, and was ready to cross it. I should have stopped it then. I should have made it clear. But part of me didn't want to believe what was happening. And that mistake would cost me more than I ever imagined. The tension had been building, but I kept ignoring it, convincing myself it was all in my head. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a family gathering, a warm evening filled with laughter, drinks, and familiar faces. Ethan had been by my side most of the night, his presence lingering like a shadow. He was different, bolder. His compliments weren't subtle anymore, his touch more deliberate. I felt it, that unspoken shift, but I refused to acknowledge it. As the night wore on, people started leaving. One by one, the house emptied until it was just the two of us. The air was thick with something unspoken. I told myself I should go to bed. That lingering would only make things worse. But before I could move, Ethan spoke. I need to tell you something. His voice was steady, but there was an urgency behind it. I turned to him, my heart already uneasy. I've loved you for a long time, he said. Not the way I'm supposed to. A cold shock spread through me. I opened my mouth, but no words came. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't ashamed. He had been holding this in, waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. You don't have to say anything, he continued. I can't pretend anymore. I stood up, needing distance, but he followed. Ethan, this isn't okay. He stepped closer. Why not? We understand each other. We're connected in a way that no one else is. You feel it too. I shook my head, taking a step back. My hands trembled, but I forced my voice to stay firm. You're my nephew. His jaw tightened. That's just a word. My stomach turned. This was beyond anything I had imagined. He wasn't confused. He wasn't mistaking admiration for something else. He meant it. He wanted something I could never give. Ethan, stop. His expression changed, hurt, frustration, something else I couldn't name. I know you care about me, he said softly. I see it in the way you look at me. I feel it when we talk. I took another step back, my pulse racing. Whatever you think is happening here, it's not real. He reached out, his fingers grazing my arm, and I yanked away. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. You need to leave, I whispered. For a long moment he didn't move. Then, finally, he stepped back, running a hand through his hair. I didn't mean to scare you, he said. I thought you might feel the same. I swallowed hard. You were wrong. He nodded slowly, his face unreadable. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. I stood frozen, heart pounding, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to face him. The weight of the night before clung to me, making it hard to breathe. I stayed in my room longer than usual, hoping he would be gone by the time I emerged. But when I finally stepped out, he was there waiting. His expression was different, no longer bold, no longer certain. There was regret in his eyes, but it didn't change what had happened. I'm sorry, he said. His voice was quiet, careful. I shouldn't have said anything. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. I don't want to lose you, he added. I don't want things to be weird between us. But they already were. Nothing he said could undo the damage. I wanted to believe we could pretend this never happened, that we could go back to how things were before. But we couldn't. I could never unhear his words, never unfeel the way my stomach had twisted when he looked at me like I was someone to be desired instead of family. I need space, I finally said. His face fell, but he nodded. I get it. For the rest of the day, I avoided him. I avoided his glances, his attempts to make small talk. I didn't tell anyone what had happened, but the shift between us was obvious. My mother asked if everything was okay, and I forced a smile, saying we were both just tired. It wasn't a lie, not entirely. I was exhausted. By the time Ethan left that evening, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The bond we once had, the easy conversations, the shared jokes, the trust, it was gone. He had crossed a line, and there was no way back. Days passed, and he didn't text me. I didn't reach out either. The silence between us stretched, growing heavier with each passing moment. A part of me wanted to talk, to find a way to fix things, but I knew better. Some things couldn't be repaired. A week later, I made my decision. I packed a bag and left town for a while, staying with an old friend. I needed distance, needed to clear my head and figure out how to move forward. Ethan had been an important part of my life for so long, but now he was a reminder of something broken. Before I left, he sent me one last message. I never meant to hurt you. I just couldn't keep pretending. I hope one day you can forgive me. I didn't respond. Not because I hated him, but because I needed to protect myself. Some betrayals weren't about anger or revenge. Some were just about loss. And in the end, that's what this was, losing someone I once trusted, someone I once thought I knew. And no matter how much time passed, I knew things would never be the same again.